My son called me. I am getting married tomorrow, Dad. I withdrew all the money from your bank accounts. Oh, and I sold the house. The new owners arrive in the morning. Bye. I stared at the black screen of the phone. Most fathers would cry. Most fathers would scream or call the police in a panic. I just sat there in my wheelchair and laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound in the empty room. My dear son Bradley did not know one tiny detail. That house he just sold to a dangerous buyer did not actually belong to me. And the war he just started was a war he was destined to lose before the first shot was fired. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful family member a lesson they would never forget. The silence in the Hamptons mansion was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that usually comes after a funeral, not before a wedding. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlantic Ocean was a slate of angry gray churning against the shore with the same violence that was currently twisting in my gut. I sat in my wheelchair, my hands trembling slightly on the armrests. Not because I was weak, but because the adrenaline was finally flooding my system after months of dormancy. The phone lay on my lap like a dead weight. Bradley's voice still echoed in the cavernous living room, stripped of the expensive art and the antique rugs Catherine had loved so much. He had been quick. I had to give him credit for that. Ruthless and quick. Dad. Listen to me, he had said, his voice rushing with a manic energy I had never heard before. Vanessa and I need the startup capital. You are not using it. You are just sitting there rotting in that chair. I used the power of attorney you signed last month. The retirement accounts are empty. The investment portfolio is liquidated. It is about $500,000. He had paused, then waiting for me to slur a protest, waiting for the stroke victim to beg. When I said nothing, he delivered the final blow. And the house. I found a cash buyer, a private equity group. They paid $1.5 million. It is below market value, but they offered immediate liquidity. They want possession tomorrow morning at 8. You need to pack your things, Dad. I booked you a room at the Shady Pines facility in Queens. It is paid for a month. After that, you are on your own. Do not come to the wedding tomorrow. You would just embarrass us. The line had gone dead. No goodbye. No I love you. Just the cold metallic click of a connection severed. I looked around the room. He had already sold the furniture last week, claiming he was decluttering the space for my safety. Now I understood. He was liquidating my life piece by piece, stripping the flesh from the bone until there was nothing left but a skeleton he could discard in a state-run nursing home. I closed my eyes and let the memories of the last 3 months wash over me. It had been the hardest performance of my life. Harder than any undercover audit I had done for the FBI in the 80s. Harder than looking a cartel boss in the eye and telling him his books were clean while wearing a wire. 3 months ago, my wife Catherine died. She was the light of this house, the only thing that kept the darkness of my profession at bay. When she passed, the silence she left behind was deafening. But it was in that silence that I began to hear other things. Whispers. I heard Bradley talking to Vanessa in the hallway after the funeral. He is old, Vanessa had hissed, her voice low and sharp. He is going to spend it all on nurses and doctors. We need that money now, Bradley. My brand is launching next month. He won't last long, Bradley had replied. He is weak. We just need to get control. That was the moment the doubt settled in my heart. A father never wants to believe his son is a monster. You want to believe that the boy you taught to ride a bike, the boy you paid through college, the boy you bailed out of trouble more times than you can count, loves you. But I was not just a father. I was a forensic auditor. My entire career was built on finding the truth hidden beneath layers of lies. I knew that people lie, but numbers do not. And the numbers of Bradley's affection were not adding up. So I devised a test, the ultimate audit of his character. I faked it. I staged a mild stroke. It was not difficult. I knew the symptoms: the facial droop, the slurred speech, the weakness on one side. I spent a week in the hospital letting the doctors run tests that came back inconclusive, attributing it to stress and age. When I came home, I committed to the role. I sat in this wheelchair. I let my hand shake when I held a cup of coffee. I let soup dribble down my chin while Bradley watched with a look of disgust he didn't even try to hide. I became the burden they said I was. And then I handed him the weapon. The power of attorney. I remember the day I signed it. It was raining, much like today. Bradley had placed the document on the table in front of me. "It is just for emergencies, Dad," he had said, his eyes shifting away from mine. "Just so I can pay the bills if you get worse. You trust me, don't you?" I had looked at him, searching for a trace of the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I searched for hesitation. I searched for guilt. I found none. I only found greed, reflecting the cold ambition of the woman waiting in the car outside. I signed it. My signature was shaky, a perfect imitation of a man losing control of his faculties. I gave him the gun, pointed it at my own chest, and waited to see if he would pull the trigger. Today, he pulled it. He did not just pull it. He emptied the clip. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass panes. I looked down at my legs. They had been still for so long that they felt heavy like lead, but they were strong. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the empty house. "It is time," I whispered to the empty room. I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. My knuckles turned white. With a grunt of effort, I pushed. I stood up. I stood tall. My spine straightened, the slump of the invalid vanishing instantly. I stretched my neck, hearing the satisfying crack of vertebrae realigning. I walked to the window, my stride long and purposeful. The limp was gone. The tremors were gone. The old confused man who needed help using the bathroom was gone. In his place stood Garrison, the man who had brought down Ponzi schemes and dismantled corporate fraud rings. The man who had been feared in boardrooms across Manhattan. Bradley thought he had robbed a senile old man. He had no idea he had just stolen from a wolf in sheep's clothing. I turned away from the window and walked across the expansive living room to the library. The shelves were empty, the books sold off in boxes for pennies on the dollar by my son. But he had missed the most important thing. He was lazy. He only looked at the surface. He saw books and saw $5 apiece. He never checked the structure. I walked to the mahogany paneling on the far wall. I pressed my thumb against a knot in the wood that was slightly darker than the rest. A section of the paneling clicked and swung open, revealing a steel safe embedded in the wall. Bradley knew about the wall safe in the master bedroom. He had emptied that weeks ago, taking Catherine's jewelry and my watch collection. He thought he had found the treasure. He didn't know that was just the decoy. I punched in the code to the hidden library safe. 7, 4, 1, 9. Catherine's birthday. The heavy door swung open. It was empty of cash. I didn't keep cash here. Cash was for amateurs. Inside, there was a single thick red file folder and a cheap disposable burner phone. I took the file and the phone. I walked to the kitchen island, the only piece of furniture too heavy for Bradley to sell. I opened the file. Inside were the documents that defined my true life. The deeds, the trust agreements, the real bank accounts that the power of attorney could not touch, and the surveillance reports. I had not just been sitting in that wheelchair staring at the wall for 3 months. I had been watching. I had hired Blackwood, my old friend, and the most vicious attorney in New York, to watch them. I flipped open the phone. It had one number programmed into it. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Garrison Blackwood's voice was gravelly, like tires on a gravel road. Is it done? The fish has taken the bait, I said. My voice was strong, resonant, the voice of a commander. He drained the decoy accounts. 500,000. And he sold the house. He sold the Hamptons house, Blackwood asked, a low whistle escaping his lips. That is bold, even for him. Does he know? He knows nothing, I said. He thinks he is a millionaire. He thinks he is a real estate tycoon. He thinks I am packing a suitcase for a nursing home in Queens. Silence on the line. Then Blackwood chuckled. It was a dark, dangerous sound. So what is the play? Garrison. Do we stop the transfer? Do we call the cops now? No, I said. I looked down at the red file. At the photo of Vanessa smiling on a yacht in Miami. A yacht that belonged to her second ex-husband, the one she had bankrupted. Not yet, I said. He wants to be a big shot. He wants to stand up at his wedding tomorrow at the plaza and brag about his empire. I want to let him. I want him to taste the champagne. I want him to feel the weight of the gold in his pocket. I paused, my hand tightening on the phone. And then when he is at the very top of the mountain, when he is looking down on everyone thinking he has won, I want to push him off. Understood, Blackwood said. Protocol 7, I confirmed. Protocol 7 was the nuclear option. It was a strategy we had devised years ago for a case involving a corrupt CEO who had stolen his employees' pension funds. It involved total asset freezing, public exposure, and simultaneous criminal prosecution. It was designed to not just stop an opponent, but to obliterate them. I want the team ready at the plaza tomorrow, I said. I want the forensic accounting report finalized. And Blackwood, yes, bring the Bentley. I am done with this wheelchair. I hung up the phone and snapped it shut. I tossed it onto the counter. I walked back to the window. The storm was picking up intensity. Rain lashed against the glass. My son had made his choice. He had chosen money over blood. He had chosen a woman who saw him as a bank account over the father who had raised him. He had chosen to discard me like trash. He thought the game was over. He thought he had checkmated the king. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a man who was about to have the last laugh. Tomorrow at the wedding of the year, my son was going to learn a very painful lesson about finance. He was going to learn the difference between ownership and stewardship. He was going to learn that the power of attorney is a powerful tool, but it is useless against irrevocable trust with a life estate clause. He thought he sold my house. He thought he stole my money. He had actually just committed federal wire fraud and sold a property he did not own to a criminal organization. I laughed again. This time it wasn't dry. It was cold. Enjoy your wedding night, Bradley, I whispered to the storm, because the honeymoon is going to be in a federal prison. I turned away from the window. I had work to do. I had to pack. Not for a nursing home, but for a war. I needed to find the suit I had hidden in the back of the closet, the one Bradley hadn't found to sell. I walked through the empty house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. For the first time since Catherine died, I didn't feel lonely. I felt focused. The old Garrison was back, and he was hungry. The rain hadn't stopped. It beat against the neon sign of Joe's all-night diner in Queens, creating a rhythmic thrumming that matched the pounding in my temples. This was the kind of place where dreams came to die over plates of greasy eggs and lukewarm coffee. It was fitting. Tonight, I was burying the last dream I had left, the dream that my son was a decent man who had simply lost his way. I sat in the corner booth, my back to the wall, a habit from a lifetime spent looking over my shoulder. I wasn't wearing the stained sweatpants of the invalid anymore. I was wearing my charcoal Brooks Brothers suit, the one I had worn to testify before Congress in '98. It smelled slightly of mothballs, but it fit like armor. The bell above the door jingled. Blackwood walked in. He didn't look like the senior partner of a white-shoe law firm. He wore a trench coat that had seen better days and a fedora pulled low. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain a body. He slid into the booth opposite me without a word. The waitress, a tired woman named Mabel, who had been working here since the Nixon administration, poured him a mug of black coffee and left the pot. "You look good for a dead man," Blackwood grunted, taking a sip of the sludge. "I feel dead," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "What do you have?" He didn't waste time. He hoisted the briefcase onto the table and clicked the brass latches. The sound echoed in the empty diner like a gunshot. He pulled out a thick stack of documents paper-clipped together and slid them across the Formica table. "I have spent 40 years dissecting financial corpses," Blackwood said, his eyes hard. "But this is a massacre." I put on my reading glasses. I didn't need them to see the truth, but I needed them to see the details. I was a forensic auditor. That wasn't just a job title on a resume. It was who I was. For 3 decades, I hunted the kind of men who destroy economies. I tracked cartel money through the labyrinth of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I found the hidden ledgers that sent CEOs to federal prison. I could look at a spreadsheet and smell the fear in the numbers. I looked at Bradley's financials. And the smell was overwhelming. It wasn't an investment portfolio. It was a crime scene. Page 1. The $500,000 he had drained from my decoy accounts yesterday. I traced the wire transfer. It hadn't gone to a startup incubator. It hadn't gone to a high-yield savings account. It had been broken up into 20 smaller transfers, all routed to offshore gambling sites and crypto wallets that were clearly Ponzi schemes. "He didn't steal your money to build a business," Garrison Blackwood said softly. "He stole it to stop the bleeding." I flipped the page. Credit card statements. Pages and pages of them. Maxed out. Cash advances taken at 28% interest. And then the payments to a shell company called North Star Logistics. "North Star Logistics," I muttered. "That sounds familiar." "It should," Blackwood said. "It is a front for Mickey the Shark." I froze. Mickey the Shark was not a nickname you wanted to see on your son's bank statement. He was a loan shark who operated out of the back of a butcher shop in Hell's Kitchen. He didn't send overdue notices. He sent men with baseball bats. 200,000, I read the figure aloud. It tasted like ash. "My son owes a loan shark $200,000. That is the principal," Blackwood corrected. "The VIG is running at 5% a week. He is drowning Garrison. That is why he sold the house so fast. That is why he took the lowball cash offer. He wasn't trying to screw you over for profit. He was trying to game his kneecaps." I stared at the numbers. The red ink blurred for a second. I remembered Bradley at 10 years old crying because he lost his allowance. I had given him more teaching him that mistakes could be fixed. I had taught him the wrong lesson. I had taught him that there was always a bailout. "This explains the urgency," I said, closing the folder. "It explains why he couldn't wait for me to die naturally." "Mickey doesn't wait." "There is more," Blackwood said. He slid a second, thinner folder across the table. I opened it. It was a copy of the sales contract for the Hamptons house. I scanned the terms. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a quick sale. It was a quitclaim deed transfer to a holding company registered in Delaware. "Who is the buyer?" I asked. "A man named Vinnie Moretti," Blackwood said. I knew the name. Moretti was a fixer for the tri-state mob. He bought distressed properties for cash, used them for money laundering or safe houses, and then flipped them. He wasn't a man who checked title insurance. He was a man who expected to get what he paid for. Bradley sold a house he doesn't own to the mob. I said, a cold laugh escaping my lips. He took $1.5 million from Vinnie Moretti for a property that belongs to the Catherine Garrison Revocable Trust, and he spent $500,000 of it paying off. Mickey Blackwood added, "So even if he wanted to refund the money when the deal goes south, he can't. He is short." The magnitude of my son's stupidity was breathtaking. He had managed to defraud his father, the federal government, and the mafia all in the same week. He had lit a match in a room full of dynamite and was planning to celebrate the explosion at his wedding. I closed the file. The auditor in me took over. The father was gone, replaced by the man who had stared down Enron executives. This wasn't a family tragedy anymore. It was a case. And I knew how to close a case. "He is not just a thief," I said, my voice steady. "He is a liability. If Vinnie Moretti finds out he has been scammed, he won't sue. He will come for blood. And since Bradley used your power of attorney," Blackwood pointed out, "technically, you are the one who sold it. Vinnie will come for you first." "Let him come," I said. "I will deal with Moretti. He is a businessman. He understands leverage. But Bradley needs to be neutralized. He is dangerous. To himself. To me. To anyone he touches." I looked at the coffee in my mug. It was cold. "He thinks he is a king," I whispered. "He thinks he has won the lottery. He is walking into the plaza tomorrow, feeling like he owns the world." "And you are going to show him he owns nothing," Blackwood said. "I am going to show him the ledger I corrected. I am going to balance the books." I looked at Blackwood. "What about the girl, Vanessa?" Blackwood reached into his briefcase again. He pulled out a large, glossy photograph and a DNA report. "You were right," he said. "She is not a 28-year-old art student. Her name is Veronica Miller. She is 32. She has 2 ex-husbands in Florida. Both filed for bankruptcy within a year of marrying her. She has a record for check fraud in Tallahassee that was sealed but not expunged." I looked at the photo. It was a mugshot. The hair was different, less blonde, less polished, but the eyes were the same. Predatory. Cold. "And the baby?" I asked. Blackwood tapped the DNA report. "I got the sample from the hairbrush you swiped from her vanity when she stayed over last month. We ran it against Bradley's toothbrush. And 0% probability of paternity," Blackwood said. "The baby isn't his." We ran a secondary match against known databases. It belongs to her personal trainer in Miami, a guy named Rico. I leaned back in the booth. The picture was complete. My son was a patsy, a mark. He was being played by a professional con artist leveraged by a loan shark and hunted by the mob. And he had betrayed the only person who could have saved him. He had sold his mother's house to pay for a life that was a lie from top to bottom. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of the executioner. The doubt was gone. The hesitation was gone. There was no moral ambiguity here. Bradley wasn't a victim. He was a co-conspirator in his own destruction. I checked my watch. It was 2 a.m. In 10 hours, the wedding would begin. In 10 hours, Bradley would stand at the altar and promise to love and cherish a woman who was already planning his bankruptcy. "We have enough," I said, gathering the files. "We have enough to send them both away for 20 years, Blackwood agreed. "But how do you want to play it?" "We could call the FBI now. They could arrest him at the rehearsal breakfast." "No," I said, standing up. "That is too private. That is too easy. He humiliated me. He treated me like a piece of furniture to be sold. He made me feel useless. I want him to feel what it is like to lose everything when the whole world is watching." I buttoned my jacket. The fabric felt good against my skin, solid, real. "I want the screen," I said, "at the reception." "It is hacked," Blackwood confirmed. "My tech guy has control. We can broadcast whatever we want." Good. Load the video from the library camera, the one where they laugh about putting me in the state home, and load the wire transfer records, and the DNA test. I picked up the files. I am going to give a toast, Blackwood. It is going to be the speech of a lifetime. We walked out of the diner into the rain. The city was asleep, unaware of the storm that was brewing in a penthouse at the plaza. I got into the passenger seat of Blackwood's Bentley. The leather was soft, the engine a low purr. As we drove towards Manhattan, I watched the skyline approach. I wasn't just Garrison the father anymore. I wasn't just Garrison the retiree. I was the auditor. And tomorrow I was going to conduct the final review. The numbers were in. The deficit was total. And it was time to foreclose. I sat in the plush leather back seat of the Bentley as the city lights blurred past the rain-streaked windows. Blackwood drove in silence, giving me the space I needed to digest the second half of the red file. The folder lay heavy on my lap, a paper tombstone for the woman my son was about to marry. I turned on the small reading light overhead. It cast a harsh yellow glow on the glossy photograph clipped to the inside cover. Vanessa. Or rather, Veronica. In the photo Bradley had sent me months ago, she was radiant. She wore a white sundress holding a paintbrush standing in front of an easel in a sunlit loft. She looked like innocence personified, the struggling art student who had captured my son's heart with her creativity and vulnerability. But the photo in my hands now was different. It was a surveillance shot taken 5 years ago in a Miami nightclub. She was wearing diamonds that cost more than a teacher's salary, her arm draped around a man who looked 20 years her senior. Her eyes weren't soft. They were scanning the room, calculating the net worth of every man in her vicinity. I flipped the page to her biography. It read like a manual on how to destroy a human being. Veronica Miller. 32 years old, not 28. A 4-year difference might seem trivial, but in the world of the con, every detail is a brick in the wall of deception. She wasn't an art student. She had dropped out of community college a decade ago. Her real education had been on the arm of wealthy, lonely men. I ran my finger down the list of her previous conquests. It was a graveyard. Husband number 1. Gary Swanson, a retired architect in Fort Lauderdale. He met her at a charity gala. 6 months later, they were married without a prenup. 1 year later, Gary filed for divorce. By then, his retirement fund was gone, drained into shell companies she controlled. The report noted that Gary now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and worked as a greeter at a hardware store to supplement his Social Security. He had lost his dignity along with his fortune. Husband number 2. Michael DeLuca, a restaurateur in Chicago. He was younger, sharper, or so he thought. He married her after a whirlwind romance. She convinced him to leverage his businesses to expand. She put her name on the loans, but kept her name off the liabilities. When the expansion failed suspiciously fast, according to the audit notes, she walked away with the liquid assets, leaving him with the debt. The file contained a police report. Michael had been found unconscious in his car, in a garage, the engine running. He survived, but he was a broken man, a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life. She was a black widow who didn't need poison. She used affection as a neurotoxin. She isolated her victims, turning them against their families, making them believe she was the only person who truly understood them. I had seen her do it to Bradley. "Mom and Dad don't understand our vision," she would whisper to him at dinner, thinking I couldn't hear. "They are stuck in the past. We are the future." She had severed the cord between father and son with a scalpel made of sweet words and sex. I turned the page to the section labeled Medical History. This was the part that made my bile rise. The pregnancy. It was her ace in the hole, the ultimate leverage. When she announced she was pregnant 3 months ago, Bradley had changed. The hesitation vanished. He became fiercely protective, desperate to provide, desperate to secure a legacy. She knew exactly which button to press. She knew that a weak man like Bradley would do anything to feel like a patriarch. She had used that child to rush the wedding. She used that child to justify the sale of the house. "We need a nest egg for the baby," she had said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside was a single long strand of blonde hair. I remembered the moment I took it. It was a month ago. Vanessa had stayed over at the Hamptons' house. She had spent an hour in the bathroom, preening, preparing for her role. When she left to go for a walk with Bradley, I had wheeled myself into the bathroom. The air still smelled of her expensive perfume, a scent that barely masked the smell of ambition. I saw her hairbrush on the marble vanity. It was full of blonde strands. My heart had hammered against my ribs. If she had come back, if she had seen the invalid standing up, the game would have been over. But I took the risk. I plucked a hair from the brush, sealed it in a bag I had taped under the wheelchair seat, and left. I had sent it to a private lab in Switzerland that Blackwood used for his high-profile divorce cases. I also sent a sample from Bradley's razor. I unfolded the DNA report Blackwood had given me. It was a complex document full of genetic markers and statistical probabilities, but the conclusion was written in plain English at the bottom. Probability of paternity 0.00%. I stared at the zeros. They were like two bullet holes in the page. The child she was carrying, the grandchild I had allowed myself to hope for in my weaker moments, was a lie. It was just another prop in her stage play. I flipped to the addendum Blackwood's team had compiled. They had run her genetic profile against known associates. The match came back to a man named Rico Silva, a personal trainer in South Beach with a record for steroid distribution. She was passing off the child of a drug dealer as the heir to the Garrison estate. I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the blood. She had tried to graft a lie onto my family tree. She had tried to steal not just my assets, but my lineage. I closed the file. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. I looked out the window. We were crossing the bridge into Manhattan. The skyline was a jagged row of teeth against the night sky. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Vanessa was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of the millions she thought she had secured. She was dreaming of the penthouse she would buy, the parties she would throw, the way she would laugh about the stupid old man she had tricked. She didn't know that the old man knew everything. She didn't know that her past was sitting in the back seat of a Bentley, waiting to introduce itself to her future. I thought about the wedding tomorrow. The white dress, the flowers, the vows, to have and to hold, for richer or for poorer. She was certainly counting on the richer. I tapped the file against my knee. Vanessa Miller thought she was marrying a gold mine. She didn't realize she was marrying a landmine, and I was holding the detonator. Blackwood glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there?" "I am better than okay," I said, my voice low. "I am ready." "You want to review the script for tomorrow?" "No need," I said. "I know exactly what I am going to say. I am going to welcome her to the family. I am going to welcome her with the same warmth she showed me." I looked down at the photo of her one last time. "You wanted a life of luxury, Veronica," I whispered to the glossy image. "You wanted to be taken care of. Don't worry. The federal government has excellent housing facilities. They will take good care of you." I slid the photo back into the folder and snapped the rubber band shut. The sound was sharp, final. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin. I turned my attention to the second stack of documents Blackwood had placed on the scarred table of the diner. These were not police reports or background checks. These were financial autopsies. The ledger of my son's life bleeding red ink onto the page. I took a sip of water, trying to wash away the taste of the cheap coffee, but the metallic tang of betrayal remained in my mouth. I adjusted my glasses and began to read the fine print of the real estate contract Bradley had signed just 24 hours ago. The document was standard, or at least it tried to look standard. But to a trained eye, it was a confession of desperation written in legalese. Sale price $1,500,000. I stared at the number. It was an insult, a slap in the face. That house in the Hamptons wasn't just a structure of wood and stone. It was where Catherine and I had spent our anniversaries. It was where we had weathered hurricanes and hosted Christmases. We had bought it for $2 million in the 90s. It was appraised at $4 million last year. Bradley had sold it for scrap. He had sold my memories, my sanctuary, my wife's garden for 30 cents on the dollar. I looked at the buyer's name again. Vinnie Moretti. In the world of forensic auditing, you learn names. You learn the names of the CEOs who cook the books, and you learn the names of the men who break the legs of the people who don't pay. Vinnie Moretti was not a real estate enthusiast. He was a shark who swam in the deep, murky waters of distressed assets. He bought properties from desperate people, stripped them of value, used them for things I didn't want to imagine, and then discarded them. I flipped to the addendum on page 4. This was the clause that made my blood run cold. Immediate possession. The seller agrees to vacate the premises by 8 a.m. on the day following the execution of this agreement. The property is sold as is, with all contents included. All contents included. My stomach twisted. Bradley hadn't just sold the house. He had sold everything inside it. My books, my clothes, Catherine's piano, the photos of his own childhood. He hadn't bothered to pack a single box. He had just walked out, locked the door, and handed the keys to a mobster, leaving 40 years of our family history to be thrown into a dumpster by Vinnie Moretti's crew. Why, I asked the empty air. Why the rush? Why the fire sale? Blackwood didn't speak. He just pointed a calloused finger at the other stack of papers. The bank statements. I pulled them closer. The story they told was even uglier than the sale of the house. It was a timeline of a slow-motion suicide. I traced the transactions back. It hadn't started yesterday. It hadn't started when Catherine died. It had started 2 years ago. While I was sitting by my wife's bedside during her chemo treatments, while I was distracted by grief and fear, Bradley had been busy. Online casinos, crypto exchanges based in Malta, sports betting apps. The amounts started small. $500 here, $1,000 there. Losses were chased with bigger bets. Wins were reinvested into riskier ventures. It was the classic spiral of the addict. The dopamine hit of the wager replacing the satisfaction of earned income. Then, 6 months ago, the pattern changed. The small, erratic withdrawals stopped. They were replaced by large, round-figure payments to a shell company. North Star Logistics. I knew that name. It was one of the many fronts used by Mickey the Shark. Mickey didn't run a casino. He didn't offer odds. He offered cash to people who had burned every other bridge, and his interest rates were calculated in broken bones. I did the math in my head, my forensic brain taking over. The payments to North Star totaled $40,000 in just 3 months. And yet the principal hadn't moved. Bradley wasn't paying down the loan. He was paying the interest. He was treading water in a sea of gasoline. The $500,000 he had stolen from my retirement account yesterday. It was gone. I could see the wire transfer receipt. It had gone straight to North Star. He hadn't stolen my money to start a new life with Vanessa. He hadn't stolen it to build a business. He had stolen it to buy his life back. He had stolen it because Mickey the Shark had likely given him a deadline that coincided with his wedding day. I looked up at Blackwood. My eyes were dry. The sadness had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. He thinks he is free, I said quietly. He thinks he paid off the shark and sold the house, and now he can play the rich husband. He thinks he wiped the slate clean. Blackwood agreed. I looked back down at the house contract, at the signature at the bottom. Bradley Garrison, acting as power of attorney for Thomas Garrison. He had signed my name. He had used the legal tool I gave him to sign a death warrant for his own future. Because here was the detail Bradley had missed. Here was the trapdoor he hadn't seen because he was too busy looking at the check. The house didn't belong to Thomas Garrison. 10 years ago, when my heart first started giving me trouble, Catherine and I had put the house into a trust, the Catherine Garrison Revocable Trust, and the deed had a specific clause, a life estate. It meant that as long as I was alive, I had the sole right to live in that house. It meant that the house could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered without the signature of the trustee. And Bradley was not the trustee. Blackwood was. The power of attorney Bradley held allowed him to access my personal checking accounts. It allowed him to make medical decisions. But it gave him absolutely no authority over the trust property. He had sold a house he did not own. He had taken $1.5 million from Vinnie Moretti for a property he had no legal right to sell. When Vinnie Moretti showed up at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to claim his prize, he wasn't going to find a vacant house. He was going to find a deed that wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. And when he went looking for his money, he was going to find that Bradley had already given it to Mickey the Shark. Bradley had effectively stolen $1.5 million from the Italian mob to pay off the Irish mob. He had placed himself directly between a hammer and an anvil, and he was currently drinking champagne thinking he was untouchable. I closed the folder. The weight of it felt final. "This isn't a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't a youthful indiscretion. This is a felony. This is fraud on a massive scale." "It is," Blackwood said. "And when Vinnie finds out..." "When Vinnie finds out," I interrupted, "he won't call a lawyer. He will come to the wedding." I pictured the scene, the Plaza Hotel, the crystal chandeliers, the expensive flowers Vanessa had demanded, and then Vinnie Moretti walking through the doors realizing he had been conned by a trust fund baby. I should warn him, the father in me whispered. I should call the police now. I should stop this before it gets violent. But then I looked at the ledger again. I looked at the dates. I saw the withdrawal made on the day of Catherine's funeral. $5,000, marked as travel expenses. He had taken money from me on the day we buried his mother, to gamble. The father in me died right then and there in that booth at Joe's Diner. The auditor stood up. "Let him come," I said. "Let them all come." I gathered the papers. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt the cold precision of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. Bradley was the tumor. He had metastasized. He was consuming everything around him. "We are going to the plaza," I told Blackwood. "I am not going there to stop a wedding. I am going there to conduct a liquidation." I checked my watch. The sun would be up soon. The day of the wedding. The day my son thought he would be crowned king. He didn't know that the castle was built on sand and the tide was coming in fast. "Drive," I said to Blackwood. "I don't want to be late for the reception. I have a feeling the entertainment is going to be unforgettable." The Bentley pulled over to the curb on 58th Street, just around the corner from the main entrance of the plaza. The rain had turned into a freezing drizzle that coated the city in a sheen of gray misery. It was the perfect weather for a tragedy, or in my case, a performance. Blackwood killed the engine. He didn't say a word. He just got out, retrieved the wheelchair from the trunk, and unfolded it on the wet pavement. I stepped out of the luxury car and lowered myself into the seat. It felt familiar now, this throne of deception. I draped a moth-eaten wool blanket over my legs, the same one I used to keep in the trunk for roadside emergencies. I messed up my hair, letting the wind catch the thinning gray strands until I looked like a man who had slept under a bridge. I slumped my shoulders, curving my spine into the question mark of the defeated. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of the Bentley. Garrison the auditor was gone. In his place sat a discard, a remnant, a father who had been chewed up and spat out by his own progeny. Blackwood handed me a small cardboard sign I had prepared. It simply read, "Family." The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. "Go get them," Blackwood whispered. He got back into the car to drive it to the garage, leaving me alone on the sidewalk. I placed my hands on the rims of the wheels. They were cold, slick with rain. I began to push. The Plaza Hotel loomed above me, a fortress of limestone and luxury. The golden light spilling from its revolving doors looked like the entrance to heaven, but I knew that inside hell was in session. Doormen in livery stood guard, their eyes scanning for guests and filtering out the unwanted. I was the definition of unwanted. I rolled up the ramp, my wheels squeaking against the stone. One of the doormen stepped forward, his hand raised in a gesture of polite dismissal. "Sir, you cannot be here," he said, his voice firm but low. "This is private property." I looked up at him, letting my jaw slacken, letting my eyes lose focus. I didn't speak to him. I spoke through him. "My son." I rasped, my voice cracking perfectly. "My son is getting married. Bradley Garrison." The doorman hesitated. The name registered. The Garrison wedding was the main event today. It was the reason the grand ballroom was closed off. It was the reason the lobby was filled with women in gowns that cost more than this man's annual salary. He looked at my rags. He looked at my wheelchair. He looked at the desperation etched into my face. He didn't see a threat. He saw a scandal. And in a hotel like the Plaza, you handle scandals by moving them out of sight as quickly as possible. "I just want to see him," I whispered. "Just one look." He tapped his earpiece, muttering something about a situation. But I didn't wait for permission. I pushed forward the wheelchair, bumping over the threshold of the revolving door. The warmth of the lobby hit me like a physical blow. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. The hum of conversation died down as I rolled onto the marble floor. I was an ink stain on a pristine white sheet. I could feel the eyes of the hotel guests on me. The judgment, the pity, the disgust. I fed on it. I let it fuel the character I was playing. I navigated through the lobby, following the signs for the grand ballroom. I knew where to go. I had studied the floor plans Blackwood had provided. I took the elevator down to the reception level. The doors opened and the noise of the party washed over me. It was a symphony of excess. A live orchestra was playing a waltz. The clinking of crystal glasses. The roar of laughter. I rolled down the hallway, the thick carpet muffling the sound of my approach. The double doors to the ballroom were open. Security was lax. Why wouldn't it be? Who would crash a wedding like this? I stopped at the entrance and looked inside. It was breathtaking, and it was sickening. My money was everywhere. It was in the thousands of white orchids cascading from the ceiling, a floral arrangement that likely cost $50,000. It was in the towering ice sculpture of a swan in the center of the seafood buffet, melting slowly under the chandeliers. It was in the rivers of Dom Perignon flowing into flutes, held by people I had never met. Strangers drinking my retirement. Strangers eating the proceeds of my wife's garden. And there, in the center of the dance floor, was my son. Bradley looked magnificent. I had to give him that. He was wearing a bespoke tuxedo that fit him perfectly, hiding the softness of a man who had never done a day of manual labor in his life. He was laughing, his head thrown back, holding a glass of champagne. He looked like a prince. He looked like a man without a care in the world. He looked like a man who believed he had gotten away with murder. Next to him was Vanessa, or Veronica, or whatever name she was using to cash the checks. She was wearing a dress that was more diamonds than fabric. It hugged her body, showing off the baby bump, that she cradled protectively with one hand. The fake heir. The golden ticket. She was beaming, playing the role of the blushing bride and the devoted mother-to-be. She looked at Bradley with a gaze that simulated adoration so well, it was almost frightening. I gripped the wheels. My knuckles turned white. This was it. The moment of impact. I pushed myself into the ballroom. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene immediately. I just rolled. Slowly. Methodically. I rolled past the tables where guests were feasting on filet mignon. I rolled past the open bar where the bartender froze mid-pour. The ripple effect started at the back of the room. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The silence spread like a contagion, moving from the outer tables toward the center of the room. The music faltered as the conductor noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The violins trailed off into a discordant scratch. Within 30 seconds, the room was silent. 500 people were staring at the ragged, wet old man in the wheelchair in the middle of the aisle. Bradley turned. He felt the weight of the silence. His smile didn't just fade. It evaporated. The blood drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the terror of a child caught stealing. His eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, looking for an excuse, looking for a hole in the floor to swallow him whole. Vanessa turned a second later. Her reaction was different. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. Her eyes narrowed into slits. Her jaw clenched. She looked at me not as a person, but as a stain on her dress, a complication she thought she had disposed of. I stopped the wheelchair 10 feet away from the head table. I let my hand shake violently as I reached out toward them. "Bradley," I croaked. The silence in the room amplified my weak voice. It carried to the rafters. "I am hungry, son." A gasp went through the room, a collective intake of breath from the high society of New York. The guests looked from the old man in the dirty blanket to the groom in the $3,000 tuxedo. They looked at the untouched plates of food on the tables and then back at me. The connection was made instantly. The narrative wrote itself in their minds. The wealthy son, the abandoned father. Bradley took a step forward, then stopped. He didn't know what to do. If he kicked me out, he was a monster. If he acknowledged me, his lie of the self-made man crumbled. He was paralyzed by his own vanity. "Dad." He hissed, his voice a desperate whisper that tried to be private, but failed. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be away." I couldn't pay, Bradley, I whined, playing the confusion card. They wouldn't let me in. "You took the money, Bradley. You took it all." The whispers started then, like the buzzing of 1,000 angry bees. The guests were leaning in, exchanging shocked glances. "He took the money. Did you hear that? Is that his father? I thought he said his father was in Europe." Vanessa stepped in front of Bradley. She was the shield. She was the general. She knew the optics were collapsing, and she had to salvage the scene. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. She didn't look compassionate. She looked like a predator assessing a wounded animal. She crouched down next to my wheelchair, putting herself at my eye level. To the room, it looked like a gesture of kindness. It looked like the bride comforting the confused elder. She placed a hand on my knee. Her nails dug into my skin through the blanket. "You old fool," she whispered, her voice low and venomous, masked by a sweet fake smile she projected to the room. "You just couldn't die quietly, could you? You had to come here and ruin my moment." I looked at her. I let a tear roll down my cheek. It was easy. I just had to think about the hairbrush I had stolen and the DNA test in the file outside. "I have nowhere to go," I said loudly for the benefit of the audience. "You sold the house, Vanessa. You sold my home. She squeezed my knee harder, painful enough to bruise. "Shut up," she hissed. "Just shut up. We are going to get security to take you to the kitchen. We will give you some scraps and then dump you in a shelter. Do you hear me? You are garbage. You are nothing." She stood up and turned to the crowd, her face transforming instantly into a mask of tragic concern. "Everyone, please," she announced, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "My father-in-law, he is not well. His mind. The dementia has been very aggressive this week. He gets confused. He wanders. We have been so worried." She motioned to a security guard standing by the wall. "Please help him to the back. He needs water. He needs to rest. We will take care of him. We always take care of him." The guests nodded, relieved. The narrative was restored. The good son, the saintly daughter-in-law, the tragic senile father. They went back to their drinks, reassured that the ugliness had a medical explanation. Bradley exhaled, his shoulders slumping. He thought he had survived. He thought the crisis was managed. The security guard approached me, reaching for the handles of my wheelchair. "Sir, let's go," he said gently. I looked at the guard. Then I looked at Bradley, who was already turning back to his champagne tower, eager to wash the taste of guilt from his mouth. Not yet, I thought. The hook is in. Now we set it. I didn't resist the guard. I let him wheel me away from the center of the floor towards the shadows at the edge of the room. But as I rolled away, I reached into the pocket of my jacket beneath the blanket. My hand closed around the small remote control Blackwood had given me. The stage was set. The players were in position. The audience was seated. Bradley raised his glass to make a toast. "I have the best family in the world," he began, his voice booming over the speakers. I pressed the button, and the lights in the ballroom went black. "Wait." The command cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a whip crack. It did not come from Bradley. It came from Vanessa. She raised a manicured hand, stopping the security guard, who was wheeling me toward the service exit. The heavy doors were just a few feet away, promising the cold, wet anonymity of the alley, but Vanessa had changed her mind. Expelling me was efficient, but it was not theatrical. And Vanessa, or Veronica as I knew her from the police files, never missed an opportunity for theater. "Bring him back," she said, her voice projecting a perfect, tremulous kindness that reached every corner of the ballroom. "He is family. We cannot just throw him out into the rain." The guard hesitated, looking from the bride to the groom. Bradley looked like he wanted to vomit. He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, staring at the tablecloth, as if hoping a trapdoor would open up and swallow him whole. He knew what a risk this was. He knew that every second I remained in the room was a second closer to disaster. But he was weak. He had always been weak. And in the face of Vanessa's calculated benevolence, he crumbled. "Do as she says," Bradley muttered, pouring himself another glass of champagne with a shaking hand. The guard turned the wheelchair around. I kept my head down, letting my chin rest on my chest, playing the part of the confused, broken patriarch. But beneath my lowered lashes, my eyes were sharp. I was recording every detail. I was the camera. I was the microphone. Vanessa gestured to a spot right next to the head table, slightly off to the side in the shadows of a massive floral arrangement. It was the place you would put a high chair for a toddler you wanted to keep quiet, or a dog bed. It was a position of maximum inferiority. "Put him there," she instructed softly, "so we can keep an eye on him." As I was wheeled into place, the crowd relaxed. A collective sigh of relief washed over the room. They whispered to each other about her grace, her patience. "Isn't she a saint?" they said, taking in the invalid father on her special day. "She truly loves Bradley." I sat there, the wet wool blanket itching my skin, and watched the sharks circle. It wasn't just Vanessa. It was her pack. An older couple approached the head table. They moved with the same predatory grace as their daughter. The man Richard was wearing a tuxedo that was a size too small, straining at the buttons. He had the red-faced, vascular look of a man who enjoyed expensive scotch on other people's tabs. The woman Linda was a faded copy of Vanessa, her face pulled tight by one too many surgeries, her neck draped in pearls that I suspected were fake. These were the in-laws, the grifters who had spawned a grifter. "Is this him?" Linda asked, looking down at me with an expression of unmasked revulsion. She held a glass of wine in one hand and used the other to fan the air in front of her nose as if I smelled of decay. "This is Garrison," Vanessa said, stepping up to stand beside my chair. She placed a hand on my shoulder. To the room, it looked like a comforting touch. To me, it felt like a branding iron. "He looks worse than you described." Richard grunted. He picked up a canapé from the table and shoved it into his mouth, crumbs falling onto his lapel. "Are you sure he is lucid?" "He has his moments." Vanessa sighed, playing the martyr. "But mostly he is just present. We are going to find him a nice facility next week. Somewhere quiet." "Somewhere cheap," Linda muttered, taking a sip of her wine. "We do not want to burn through the inheritance on nursing fees." I sat motionless. I didn't react. I let them talk over me as if I were a piece of furniture. It is a strange thing to be invisible while sitting in the center of a room. People assume that because you are in a wheelchair, because you look disheveled, your ears have stopped working. They assume your brain has atrophied. They say things in front of you that they would never say if they thought you were a threat. I was gathering ammunition. Every insult, every dismissal, every greedy comment was a bullet I was loading into the chamber. Bradley finally looked up from his glass. He saw his new in-laws hovering over his father like vultures. For a second, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. He took a half step toward us. "Maybe we should let him rest in one of the hotel rooms," Bradley suggested weakly. "It is loud in here." "Nonsense," Vanessa cut him off, her voice sharp. "He wants to see his son get married." "Don't you, Dad?" She leaned down, her face inches from mine. The smell of her perfume was overpowering, a cloying floral scent meant to mask the rot beneath. She grabbed a napkin from the table and began to wipe my face. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't drooled, but she wiped my mouth anyway, rough and humiliating, treating me like a child who had made a mess. To the cameras flashing in the distance, it was a tender moment. The beautiful bride caring for the elderly. But as she leaned in, her lips brushed my ear. She lowered her voice to a whisper that only I could hear. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Thank you for the retirement fund, old man," she hissed. "You made this whole day possible. The dress, the flowers, the ring. It is all you." She paused, twisting the napkin against my cheek until it burned. "And don't worry about the house. We got a great price. Vinny paid cash. We are going to burn through that money in a year, having the time of our lives. And you are going to rot in a state home in Queens. I picked it out myself. It smells like urine and boiled cabbage. You will fit right in." She pulled back her face, beaming with a radiant plastic smile for the guests. "There," she said loudly. "All clean." She patted my cheek. "Pat, pat, like a dog." I stared at her. I looked deep into her eyes. I didn't see a soul. I saw a calculator. I saw a woman who had measured my life in dollars and cents and decided I was worth more dead than alive. Bradley watched the whole exchange. He heard the tone, if not the words. He saw the way she handled me. He saw the cruelty in her touch. And he did nothing. He turned back to the table and poured another drink. That was the moment the last tether snapped. The final thread of fatherly affection that had been holding me back, making me hesitate, making me wonder if I was being too harsh, severed completely. He wasn't a victim of her manipulation. He was a willing participant. He was trading his father's dignity for a trophy wife and a pile of cash he hadn't earned. He was a coward. And in my world, in the world of audits and accountability, cowards were the first to fall. Linda leaned over and poked my arm with a manicured nail. "Hey," she said loudly as if I were deaf. "Do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is?" I looked at her. I slowly let a line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. It was a degradingly effective trick. "Oh God, gross." Linda recoiled, stepping back so fast she bumped into a waiter. "Get him a bib or something." Richard laughed, a deep belly laugh that shook his ill-fitting tuxedo. "He is gone, Linda. The lights are on, but nobody is home. Let's just hope the check cleared before his brain turned to mush." Vanessa laughed with them, a tinkling bell-like sound that made my skin crawl. "Bradley, honey," she called out. "Come take a picture with us. With your dad. For the album." Bradley walked over. He moved like a man walking to the gallows. He stood behind my wheelchair, placing a hand on my shoulder. His hand was trembling so badly I could feel the vibrations through the padding of my jacket. "Smile, Dad," he whispered. "Please, just smile." The photographer approached, crouching down to get the angle. "Everyone say family," he shouted. "Family." The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Vanessa posed, one hand on her fake baby bump, the other resting possessively on Bradley's chest. Richard and Linda flanked us, grinning like hyenas who had just taken down a gazelle. And me, the prop, the checkbook, the corpse at the feast. I didn't smile. I stared directly into the lens of the camera. I wanted this recorded. I wanted a permanent record of their hubris. I wanted them to look back at this photo in 5 years, from the visiting room of a correctional facility, and remember the moment they thought they had won. The flash went off. Once, twice, blind white light searing the image onto the sensor. "Okay, great," the photographer said. "Beautiful family." Vanessa straightened up, brushing invisible dust from her skirt, where it had touched my wheelchair. "Okay, show's over," she muttered, her smile dropping instantly. "Leave him there. He can watch us eat." She turned to the waiter. "Bring him a plate. Something soft. Mashed potatoes. And keep the water coming. We don't want him passing out from dehydration before the speeches." They turned their backs on me. All of them. Vanessa, Bradley, Richard, Linda. They walked back to their seats at the head table, laughing, clinking glasses, tearing into the expensive appetizers that my life savings had paid for. They ate with gusto. They ate with the ravenous hunger of people who have never created anything, only consumed. I sat in the shadows watching them. I felt the remote control in my pocket. It was warm from the heat of my hand. I looked at Bradley one last time. He was drinking again, gulping down the wine as if it were water. He was trying to drown the guilt. He was trying to numb the voice in his head that told him this was wrong. But he wouldn't listen to it. He had made his choice. He had sold his soul for a seat at this table. I waited. I let them eat. I let them get comfortable. I let the wine flow and the laughter rise. I let them believe for just a few more minutes that they were the masters of the universe. The entree was served. Filet mignon with truffle butter. The smell wafted toward me, rich and savory. My stomach rumbled, a reminder that I hadn't eaten since the diner coffee at 2 a.m. But I ignored it. I had a different kind of hunger. I watched as the best man stood up to give a speech. He was a frat brother of Bradley's, a man named Chad, who worked in hedge funds and laughed too loud. He told stories about their college days, about Bradley's ambition, about how lucky he was to find a woman like Vanessa who supported his vision. Vanessa dabbed at her dry eyes with a napkin, performing humility for the crowd. Bradley looked down at his plate, forcing a smile. It was a farce. A play written by liars and performed by thieves. And I was the critic who was about to write the final review. The speeches dragged on. The father of the bride, Richard, stood up. He rambled about how proud he was to welcome Bradley into the family, about the merging of two great dynasties. It was laughable. He was a failed car salesman from Jersey with a gambling problem, and Bradley was an unemployed day trader living on stolen credit. Two great dynasties of nothing. I checked my watch beneath the blanket. It was time. Blackwood would be in the control booth by now. The exits would be monitored by the private security team I had hired to ensure Vinnie Moretti didn't kill anyone before the police arrived. The stage was set. Bradley stood up. It was his turn. The groom's speech. He took the microphone. His hand was steadier now, fortified by half a bottle of Cabernet. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the admiration, at the envy. He puffed out his chest. He believed his own con. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed, his voice amplified by the speakers. I gripped the remote. "This day means the world to me," he continued. "It represents the start of a new chapter. A chapter of success, of family, of legacy." Legacy. That was the trigger word. I looked at the back of his head. I looked at Vanessa's smug profile. I pressed the button. The giant LED screen behind the head table, which had been displaying a slideshow of their engagement photos, flickered. The image of them kissing on a beach in Maui dissolved into static. The music cut out with a screech of feedback. The room went silent again. Confused whispers rippled through the crowd. Bradley tapped the microphone. Is the tech guy there?" "We lost the picture." Then the screen flared to life again. But it wasn't a picture of the happy couple. It was a grainy black and white video. The timestamp in the corner read, 3 days ago. The location was unmistakable. It was the library of my home in the Hamptons. The audio crackled over the ballroom speakers loud and clear. It was Bradley's voice. "Just sign it, Dad. Just sign the damn paper." And then Vanessa's voice, sharp and cruel. "Hurry up, Bradley. If he doesn't sign it today, we can't sell the house before the wedding. Grab his hand if you have to." The guests gasped. I smiled in the shadows. The hunger was gone. The only thing left was the satisfaction of a job well done. The auditor had taken the floor, and the audit was about to begin. The waiter refilled my water glass with a look of profound pity that made my skin crawl. To him and to everyone else in this gilded cage of a ballroom, I was a tragic figure, a relic of a bygone era sitting in a wheelchair, with a stained blanket watching the son I had supposedly raised take the stage to celebrate a victory he had not earned. The lights dimmed, focusing all the attention on the center of the room where Bradley stood, microphone in hand, bathing in the adoration of 500 guests who were drinking champagne paid for by my stolen retirement fund. He looked the part. I had to give him that. The alcohol had flushed his cheeks, giving him a look of vitality that masked the rot underneath. He loosened his bow tie, a gesture meant to signal a relaxed confidence, the casual power of a man who owned the room. Vanessa sat nearby, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her eyes fixed on him with a look of calculated devotion. It was a tableau so perfect it made my teeth ache. Bradley tapped the microphone. The thud echoed through the silence, commanding attention. He smiled that charming, boyish smile that had gotten him out of trouble with his teachers, with the police, and eventually, he thought, with me. "Thank you all for coming." He began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight isn't just about love. It isn't just about the union between me and my beautiful Vanessa. It is about legacy." He paused for effect, letting the word hang in the air. Legacy. It was a word he had no right to use. A legacy is built stone by stone over a lifetime of labor and integrity. It isn't stolen in the dead of night with a forged signature. I looked around at the faces in the crowd. They were nodding. They were buying it. These were the elite of New York people who prided themselves on their discernment, yet they were being conned by a man whose net worth was entirely negative. They saw the suit, they saw the venue, they saw the beautiful wife, and they assumed success. They didn't see the loan sharks waiting in the shadows, or the federal agents I knew were currently setting up a perimeter in the lobby. For a long time, Bradley continued, his voice dropping to a more somber, serious register. I lived in the shadow of a giant. My father, Garrison. He pointed at me. A spotlight swung around, blinding me for a moment. I squinted against the glare, looking small and frail in my chair. The guests turned to look, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. He built an empire, Bradley said, lying through his teeth. He taught me everything I know about business, about honor, about family. But as we all know, time is a thief. He sighed, a theatrical exhale that was worthy of an Oscar. The last few months have been hard. Seeing a man as strong as my father decline. It breaks a son's heart. But it also forces a son to step up, to become the man his father needs him to be. He walked to the edge of the stage, looming over me. Dad, he said, addressing me directly, you can rest now. You don't have to worry about the accounts anymore. You don't have to worry about the properties. I have taken the helm. I have consolidated our assets. I have made the hard decisions you couldn't make anymore. Consolidated assets. That was a polite way of saying he had liquidated everything to pay off his gambling debts. Hard decisions. That meant selling my home to a mobster. The crowd murmured their approval. What a good son, I heard a woman whisper nearby. Stepping in to save the family business. Bradley beamed, feeding off their energy. He turned back to the room, his voice rising, gaining momentum. And I am proud to announce that as of yesterday, we have entered a new phase. Garrison Holdings is not just surviving. We are evolving. With the capital I have secured, Vanessa and I are launching a new venture, a global lifestyle brand that will redefine luxury for the next generation. He raised his glass high. To the future, he shouted. To a new empire. And to my father, who can finally enjoy his twilight years in peace, knowing his legacy is safe in my hands. The room exploded into applause, a standing ovation. They cheered for the thief. They toasted the liar. They celebrated the destruction of my life as if it were a triumph of succession. Vanessa stood up and kissed him, a flashbulb-perfect moment of marital bliss. She whispered something in his ear that made him laugh, a laugh that sounded to me like the cracking of a whip. I sat there motionless. The applause washed over me like a physical wave. I felt the weight of the remote control in my pocket. It was a small plastic device, cool to the touch. My thumb rested on the button. In that moment, looking at my son preening on that stage, I realized something terrifying. He actually believed his own lies. He wasn't just conning them. He had conned himself. He truly believed that stealing my money made him a businessman. He believed that selling my house made him a real estate mogul. He had lived in the fantasy for so long that reality had ceased to exist for him. He thought he was the hero of this story. I looked at Blackwood, who was standing near the sound booth in the back of the room. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The system was ready. The trap was primed. I looked back at Bradley. He was taking a sip of champagne, his eyes scanning the room, looking for validation, looking for envy. He found it in the faces of his friends, in the smiles of his new in-laws. But then his eyes landed on me. For a split second, the mask slipped. The smile faltered. He looked at the old man in the wheelchair, the father he had betrayed, and I saw a flash of fear. Deep down in the part of his soul he hadn't yet sold, he knew. He knew he was a fraud. He knew he was weak. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I held his gaze with the intensity that cut through the distance between us. I wanted him to see me. Not the invalid, not the victim. I wanted him to see the auditor. You wanted a legacy, Bradley, I thought. I am about to give you one. I pulled the remote from my pocket. I didn't hide it this time. I held it openly in my lap. Bradley saw it. He frowned, confused. He didn't know what it was. A medical device, a phone. Then he saw my thumb move. The applause was starting to die down. The guests were reaching for their drinks, preparing to resume their conversations, preparing to move on to the next course of the meal, oblivious to the fact that the floor was about to drop out from under them. Now I whispered. I pressed the button. The giant LED screen behind the head table, which had been displaying a slideshow of their engagement photos, Bradley and Vanessa on a beach. Bradley and Vanessa in Paris, Bradley and Vanessa spending my money, flickered violently. The image of them kissing on a yacht dissolved into static. A high-pitched screech of audio feedback cut through the room, silencing the remaining applause instantly. Guests covered their ears. The waiters stopped in their tracks. Bradley spun around, looking at the screen. "What is that?" he shouted at the tech booth. "Fix it!" Vanessa looked panic-stricken. This wasn't in the script. Perfection was breaking down. Then the static cleared. The image that replaced it was not a professional photo. It was grainy black and white, shot from a high angle. It was the library of my house in the Hamptons. The date stamp in the corner was glowing in neon green letters. 3 days ago. The room went deathly silent. You could hear the hum of the projector. On the screen, 2 figures walked into the frame. Bradley and Vanessa. They weren't posing. They weren't smiling for the cameras. They looked agitated, hungry. The audio crackled over the ballroom speakers, loud and clear, stripping away the polish of the wedding venue and replacing it with the raw, ugly sound of conspiracy. It was Bradley's voice. "Just sign it, Dad. Just sign the damn paper." And then Vanessa's voice, sharp and cruel, echoing off the walls of the ballroom. "Hurry up, Bradley. If he doesn't sign it today, we can't sell the house before the wedding. Grab his hand if you have to. Force him." The gasp from the audience was a physical thing, sucking the air out of the room. I sat back in my wheelchair. I crossed my hands over my chest. The speech was over. The evidence had begun. And the empire my son had just claimed was about to burn to the ground. The video continued to play on the massive screen looming over the head table. It was a masterclass in cruelty, broadcast in high definition. The grainy black and white footage from the library security camera was unforgiving. It showed Bradley guiding my hand across the paper, his face twisted in a sneer of impatience. On the screen, he looked up at Vanessa and laughed. It was a sound that curdled the blood. "He is totally gone, the on-screen," Bradley said, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "He thinks he is signing a medical release. He has no idea he just gave away the deed." Vanessa walked into the frame. She was holding a bottle of wine she had taken from my cellar, a vintage Bordeaux I had been saving for my 20th anniversary with Catherine. She took a swig directly from the bottle. "Who cares what he thinks," she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "The old man is a vegetable. He will be dead in 6 months, anyway. We might as well enjoy the money while he is still rotting in that chair." The ballroom was frozen. 500 guests, the elite of New York society, stared in horror at the giant screen. The image froze on a close-up of their faces. They were clinking glasses over the document, their expressions filled with a greedy, predatory glee. It was the undeniable face of malice. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the terrified, ragged breathing of my son. Bradley stood on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the screen, then at the audience, then at Vanessa. His face had gone the color of ash. He tried to speak, tried to find a lie that could cover this, but his voice failed him. Vanessa was statue still, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the realization that her mask had been ripped off in front of everyone who mattered. I sat in the shadows for one heartbeat longer. I let the shame soak into them. I let the realization of their exposure settle into their bones. Then I moved. I gripped the blanket that covered my legs. The moth-eaten wool that had been my costume, my shield, my disguise. With a violent jerk of my hand, I threw it aside. It landed on the floor in a heap of gray misery. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I didn't tremble. I didn't struggle. I pushed down with the strength of a man who has spent a lifetime holding up the weight of the world. I stood up, a collective gasp ripped through the room. It started near me and spread outward like a wave. The invalid was rising. The broken man was straightening his spine. I stretched to my full height, 6 feet and 2 inches of cold, hard retribution. I adjusted my jacket. I fixed my cuffs. I looked at the stage with eyes that were no longer cloudy or confused. They were sharp. They were clear. They were the eyes of the auditor. I took a step forward, then another. My stride was long and powerful. The limp was gone. The shuffle was gone. I walked toward the stage not as a father approaching his son, but as a judge approaching the bench. The crowd parted for me. They shrank back, sensing the danger radiating from me. I walked up the stairs to the stage, my footsteps heavy and deliberate on the wood. I walked past Vanessa, who shrank away from me as if I were a ghost. I walked up to Bradley, who was trembling so violently he could barely hold his champagne glass. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He didn't resist. He couldn't. He was paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying resurrection of the man he thought he had buried. I looked out at the audience. I looked at the frozen image on the screen behind me. Then I looked at my son. "You wanted a speech, Bradley," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, deep and resonant. "You wanted to talk about legacy. You wanted to talk about empire." I paused, letting the word hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Let's talk about ownership. You think you sold my house, Bradley. You think you pulled off the deal of the century. You stood there and toasted your own genius, while the ink was still wet on a contract that is nothing more than a confession of fraud." I looked out at the silent ballroom. The guests were frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths, captivated by the spectacle of a family destroying itself in real time. I turned my gaze to the back of the room near the exit, where 3 men in dark suits were standing. They didn't look like wedding guests. They looked like oversized refrigerators stuffed into polyester. They weren't drinking. They weren't smiling. They were watching Bradley with the intensity of wolves watching a limping deer. I pointed the microphone at them. "Do you see those gentlemen in the back?" "Bradley," I asked, my voice calm, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I believe they work for Mr. Moretti. Vinnie Moretti. The man you sold my house to yesterday for $1.5 million in cash." Bradley followed my gaze. He saw the men. He recognized them. He had likely handed them the keys just this morning. His face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of gray. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, dripping down to stain the collar of his bespoke tuxedo. "They are here to collect," I continued. "They are here to celebrate the acquisition of a prime Hamptons estate for pennies on the dollar. They think they own it. They think they have a valid deed." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "But they don't. And neither do you." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a blue document cover. It wasn't the red file. It was something older. Something sacred. I opened it, the crisp paper crackling in the microphone. "You made a mistake, son. A fatal error in your due diligence. You assumed that because I lived in the house, I owned the house. You assumed that the power of attorney you forced me to sign gave you the right to sell everything I touched. But you never checked the title. You never went to the county clerk. If you had, you would have found this." I held the document up. "This is the deed to the property at 12 Ocean Drive. And if you look closely at the grantor line, you won't see the name Thomas Garrison. You will see the name Catherine Garrison, Revocable Trust." A murmur went through the crowd. The lawyers in the room, and there were many, leaned forward. They knew what was coming. They understood the trap snap before it even closed. "Your mother knew Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like a shout. "She knew who you were. She knew about the gambling. She knew about the lies. When she got sick, she made me promise to protect the house. Not from the market. Not from the tax man. From you." I walked closer to him. He shrank back, hitting the table behind him, trapping himself between me and his terrified bride. We placed the house into the trust. 10 years ago, I explained, dismantling his life sentence by sentence. And we added a specific clause. A life estate. Do you know what that means, Bradley? You went to business school. You should know. He shook his head mutely, tears streaming down his face. "It means I am a tenant," I said. "I have the right to live there until I take my last breath. But I do not own the bricks, I do not own the land, and most importantly, I cannot sell it. The trust owns it, and the trustee is not you. It is not me. It is Mr. Blackwood." I gestured to the back of the room where Blackwood stood, arms crossed, a grim smile on his face. "So when you signed that contract yesterday, when you took that cash from Mr. Moretti, you were selling something that did not belong to you. You were selling the Brooklyn Bridge. You committed fraud, Bradley. Not just against me, against Vinnie Moretti." I looked back at the men in the dark suits. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at Bradley. One of them took out his phone and started dialing. The other two unbuttoned their jackets. The message was clear. The deal was dead, and they wanted their money back. "But you don't have the money, do you?" I asked, twisting the knife. "You didn't put that $1.5 million into a savings account. You didn't buy stocks. You wired it. You wired every single cent to North Star Logistics to pay off your other debts." Vanessa let out a strangled cry. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "You paid them!" she shrieked, forgetting the microphone, forgetting the audience. "You told me we had the cash. You told me we were rich. I paid." "Mickey," Bradley screamed back, his voice cracking, hysteria taking over. "I had to. He was going to kill me." The confession rang out through the ballroom. The guests gasped. The facade of the successful businessman crumbled into dust, revealing the desperate, frightened gambler beneath. "So let us recap," I said, my voice booming like a gavel. "You sold a house you don't own to the Italian mob to pay off a debt to the Irish mob. You have 0 assets, you have 0 property, and you have 3 very angry men standing by the exit who are just realizing that they have been conned out of $1.5 million by a man wearing a rented tuxedo." I turned to the crowd. "This wedding is a fraud," I declared. "The groom is bankrupt. The bride is marrying a dead man walking. And the house they planned to live in, the house they sold to fund this party, is still mine. It will always be mine." I looked at Vanessa. She was staring at Bradley with pure hatred. Her retirement plan had just evaporated. Her golden ticket had turned into a subpoena. "And you, my dear," I said to her, "you thought you were smart. You thought you could wait me out. You thought you could throw me in a home and count the cash. But you forgot the first rule of the con. Never play a player." I turned back to Bradley. He was sobbing now, a pathetic, broken sound. "Dad, please," he begged, reaching out a hand toward me. "Help me fix it. Talk to them. You can fix this. You always fix it." I looked at his hand. The hand that had forced mine to sign the paper. The hand that had sold my wife's piano. I stepped back. "I am not your father right now, Bradley," I said coldly. "I am the auditor, and the books are closed." I pointed to the back of the room. The 3 men in suits were moving. They were walking down the aisle, pushing guests out of the way. They weren't running. They didn't need to run. They knew Bradley had nowhere to go. "The contract you signed is void," I said. But the debt you created is very real. You took their money. Now you have to explain to them why you can't give it back." I turned my back on him. I walked to the edge of the stage and sat down on the stairs, watching the chaos unfold. The wedding of the century had turned into a crime scene, and I had the best seat in the house that was and would remain mine. You think you solved your problem, Bradley. You think that by wiring that money to Mickey the shark, you bought your freedom. You think that even though the house deal is void, at least the loan shark won't break your legs. You are looking at those men by the door and thinking you can negotiate. You can beg. You can promise them a payment plan. But you are forgetting who I am. You are forgetting what I did for 30 years before I retired to that house you tried to sell. I didn't just audit companies. I hunted money launderers. I tracked dirty cash through the veins of the global economy until I found the heart of the crime and stopped it. And do you know what the first rule of catching a thief is? You don't chase him. You let him steal something that is radioactive. I looked at the screen behind me. The video of the library faded, replaced by a digital bank statement. It was projected 10 feet high, every digit crisp and damning. The account number was highlighted in red. The balance before the withdrawal was $500,000. The balance now was zero. "That account you drained yesterday," I said, my voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the chests of the front row guests. "You thought it was my pension. You thought it was the accumulation of a lifetime of 401k contributions. You saw the label retirement fund on the statement and your eyes lit up with greed. But you didn't check the routing number. You didn't check the origin of the funds." I walked closer to him. He was shaking his head, a low moan escaping his lips. "That account is what we in the Bureau call a honeypot," I revealed. "It is a trap, a digital cage with the door left wide open. I set it up 6 months ago when I first suspected you were stealing from me. I seeded it with funds that are flagged by the Treasury Department. Every cent in that account is marked. It is digital dye. And the moment you moved it, you triggered a silent alarm at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan." Vanessa gasped. She looked at her phone as if expecting it to explode. She realized she was standing next to a man who hadn't just gone broke, but who had just become a target for the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. "Let me explain the law to you, son," I continued, pacing the stage like a prosecutor in a closing argument. "Since you seem to have skipped that class in business school. When you took that money, it was theft, a state crime. Bad, but manageable. Maybe you get probation. But when you wired it across state lines, that is wire fraud, a federal crime. And when you sent it to North Star Logistics..." I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "North Star isn't just a loan shark operation, Bradley. It is a known front for money laundering. It is on the OFAC watch list. By sending $500,000 of flagged money to a sanctioned entity, you didn't just pay a debt. You committed money laundering. You engaged in a financial transaction involving the proceeds of specified unlawful activity." I pointed at the screen where the wire transfer confirmation was now displayed. "That receipt isn't a proof of payment. It is a confession. It is a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary. You didn't just steal from your father. You washed dirty money for the mob using a federal tripwire. You are not just a thief anymore. You are a domestic financial terrorist in the eyes of the law." Bradley fell to his knees. His legs simply gave out. He knelt on the stage in his expensive tuxedo, weeping openly. The champagne glass he had been holding rolled away, spilling its contents like golden blood across the floor. "Dad, I didn't know," he sobbed. "I swear I didn't know. I just needed the money." "Ignorance is not a defense," I said coldly. "It is an aggravating factor. You were so eager to rob me that you didn't even look at what you were stealing. You grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, and put it in your pocket." I looked out at the audience. The shock had turned to terror. People were standing up, looking for the exits, realizing that being at this wedding might make them witnesses in a RICO case. The waiters were freezing in place, trays of food forgotten. "And do you know what happens when a honeypot is breached?" I asked the room. "The response team doesn't wait. They don't send a letter. They send a tactical team." As if on cue, the sound of sirens began to bleed through the heavy walls of the plaza. It started as a distant wail, then grew louder, a chorus of authority converging on Fifth Avenue. The blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows of the ballroom, cutting through the gloom of the rain. "Those aren't ambulances, Bradley," I said. "And they aren't coming for me." I looked at Vanessa. She was trying to back away, trying to put distance between herself and Bradley, as if proximity to him was contagious. She looked at the exits, but the doors were blocked by Vinnie Moretti's men, who were now looking at the flashing lights outside with expressions of professional concern. They knew when a job had gone sideways. They were already calculating their exit strategies, leaving Bradley to take the fall alone. "You married a felon, Vanessa," I told her. "You married a man who is going to spend the next 20 years in a cell wearing an orange jumpsuit that definitely does not match your eyes. You wanted his assets. You got them. You got his debt. You got his enemies. And you got his criminal record. In the eyes of the law, a spouse is often considered an accomplice if they benefited from the crime. And that dress, that ring." I pointed to the diamond on her finger sparkling under the stage lights. "That was paid for with the proceeds of crime. The FBI calls that asset forfeiture. They are going to take it off your finger before they put the handcuffs on your wrists." She screamed. It was a primal sound of rage and defeat. She tried to pull the ring off, clawing at her own hand, but her fingers were swollen with the pregnancy, or perhaps with the panic. I turned back to Bradley. He was looking at the floor, defeated, broken. "The money is gone, son," I said, my voice softening just enough to let the blade slide in deeper. "The house is gone. Your freedom is gone. And the saddest part, you did it to yourself. I didn't force you to sign that power of attorney. I didn't force you to gamble. I didn't force you to marry a woman who only loved your bank balance. You made every single one of those choices, and now you have to pay the bill." The doors to the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the police yet. It was the hotel security team, followed closely by a group of men in windbreakers with yellow letters on the back. FBI. They moved with efficiency. They swarmed the room, securing the exits, identifying the targets. Vinnie's men raised their hands, instantly knowing the drill. They would lawyer up. They would survive. But Bradley stared at the agents rushing toward the stage with the look of a man watching a tsunami hit the shore. I looked at Blackwood. He closed his folder. His job was done. The trap had sprung. The prey was caught. "There is no inheritance," I said to Bradley as the agents mounted the stairs. "There is no trust fund, baby. There is just a man who tried to eat his father and choked on the bones." I stepped back, giving the agents a clear path. "Take him," I said to the lead agent. "He is all yours." The agent nodded to me, a sign of recognition between professionals. He grabbed Bradley by the arm and hauled him to his feet. He spun him around and slammed him against the table, the sound of the impact echoing through the silent room. "Bradley Garrison, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The cuffs clicked shut. The sound was the period at the end of a very long, very ugly sentence. I watched them drag him away. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were pleading. He mouthed the word, "Dad." I didn't answer. I didn't look away. I watched him go. I watched my son leave the life of luxury he had felt entitled to and enter the system he had thought he was above. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more loose end. One more lie that needed to be exposed before I could walk out of that hotel and never look back. I turned to Vanessa. She was cornered by two agents crying fake tears, trying to play the victim. "Wait," I said into the microphone. Before you take her, there is one more thing the groom needs to know. One more gift for the happy couple. I pulled the last document from my pocket. The DNA test. The room held its breath one last time. Hold him, I commanded the agents. Just for a second. He needs to hear this. He needs to know exactly what he sold his soul for. The agents paused. Even they, professionals hardened by years of chasing white-collar criminals, were captivated by the sheer magnitude of the tragedy unfolding. They held Bradley by the arms, turning him so he could face his bride. He looked broken. His tuxedo was rumpled, his face wet with tears and sweat. He looked at me, with the eyes of a dog that has been kicked, hoping for a scrap of mercy. But I had no mercy left. I had spent it all on the nights I lay awake wondering where I had gone wrong as a father. I walked over to Vanessa. She was trembling, her hands clutching her stomach, using the pregnancy as a shield, a last line of defense against the consequences of her actions. She looked at the agents, then at her parents, who were cowering in their seats, trying to make themselves invisible. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She knew what was in the envelope. She knew because she had lived the lie every day for 6 months. You told him it was a miracle, I said, my voice soft, but amplified by the microphone so that every whisper reached the back of the room. You told him that this child was the future of the Garrison name. You used an unborn baby as leverage to speed up the wedding, to force the sale of the house, to guilt him into stealing my retirement. I circled her like a predator circling prey. You played on his vanity, Vanessa. You knew he was weak. You knew he was desperate to prove he was a man. And what better way to prove it than to become a father, to continue the line, to build a dynasty? Bradley let out a sob. Vanessa, tell him to stop. Tell him it is real. Vanessa didn't speak. She couldn't. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the report. It was thick, detailed, scientific proof of infidelity. I remember when you stayed at the house last month, I said. You spent hours in the bathroom. You left your hairbrush on the vanity. You thought I was a senile old man who couldn't even wipe his own face. You didn't think I would notice a few stray hairs. You didn't think I would know how to package them for a forensic lab in Zurich. I held the papers up for the cameras, for the guests, for history. And Bradley, I continued, turning to my son. You left your razor in the guest bath. You were careless. You were always careless. I walked up to Vanessa and thrust the papers into her chest. She grabbed them reflexively, clutching them as if they were a lifeline, though they were actually an anchor dragging her down. Read it, I ordered. Read the probability of paternity. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. No, she whispered. Please don't. Read it, I roared, my voice cracking with the fury of a grandfather who had been denied his own blood. She looked down at the paper. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. 0, I said for her. 0%. I turned to Bradley. That baby isn't a Garrison son. That baby has absolutely no genetic connection to you. You didn't secure a legacy. You secured a liability. Bradley slumped in the agent's grip. His legs gave out completely, and they had to hold him up. No, he moaned. She said. She swore. She lied, I cut him off. Just like she lied about her age. Just like she lied about her art degree. Just like she lied about loving you. I pointed to the second page of the report, the one with the mugshot attached. Meet the real father, I announced. His name is Rico Silva. He is a personal trainer in Miami. He has a record for steroid distribution and assault. He is currently out on bail. I looked at Vanessa, who was sobbing uncontrollably, now her face buried in her hands. You were going to pass off the child of a felon as my grandson, I said, my voice dripping with disgust. You were going to let me bounce that child on my knee. You are going to let me leave my estate to a stranger. That is not just fraud, Vanessa. That is a violation of nature. That is a theft of blood." I looked at her parents, Richard and Linda. They were staring at their daughter with horror. Not because of the moral failing, but because the con had failed. They realized the golden goose was dead. "Congratulations, Richard," I said to the father of the bride. "You are going to be a grandfather. I hope you have a guest room because Rico is going to need a place to stay when he gets out of jail. And so is your daughter." I turned back to Bradley. He was looking at Vanessa, and the expression on his face was the most painful thing I had ever seen. It wasn't anger. It was the total, absolute destruction of hope. He realized that every single part of his life, every pillar he had built his happiness on, was fake. The money was stolen. The house was rented. The wife was a con artist. The child was a stranger's. He had destroyed his father for nothing. "Why?" Bradley whispered, looking at Vanessa. "Why did you do it?" Vanessa looked up. Her eyes were hard now. The tears had stopped. The victim act was over. She looked at him with pure contempt. "Because you were an easy mark, Bradley," she spat. "Because you were desperate to be someone important. I didn't have to trick you. You tricked yourself. You wanted the fantasy so bad you never checked the facts." The agents had heard enough. They hauled Bradley upright. "Let's go," one of them said. Bradley didn't fight. He didn't look back at her. He looked at Mimo. "Dad," he said, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "I have nothing." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised. I looked at the man who had sold my home. "You are right," I said. "You have nothing, and you deserve less." The agents dragged him out. The doors swung shut behind him, sealing his fate. I was left on the stage with Vanessa. The crowd was silent, watching the final act of the dissection. "You should leave," I told her. "The police are coming for you next. Vinnie Moretti is going to want to know where his money went, and since Bradley is in custody, you are the next best thing." She looked at the exit where Vinnie's men were still standing, talking on their phones, looking at her. The color drained from her face completely. She realized that prison might be the safest place for her right now. She dropped the DNA report on the floor. She gathered her skirt. She didn't say goodbye to her parents. She didn't look at the guests. She ran. She ran off the stage, down the aisle, and out a side door, disappearing into the rain-soaked streets of New York, a fugitive in a diamond-encrusted gown. I stood alone on the stage. The silence was heavy. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ruin. I looked down at the papers scattered on the floor. The deed, the bank statement, the DNA test, the debris of a family explosion. I adjusted my cuffs. I buttoned my jacket. I looked out at the guests. 500 people who had come for a wedding and witnessed an execution. "Thank you for coming," I said into the microphone. "Please enjoy the food. It is already paid for." I placed the microphone on the table. It made a dull thud. I walked down the stairs. I walked past the stunned in-laws who were arguing in hushed whispers. I walked past the ice sculpture that was dripping water onto the floor, a weeping swan. I walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby. Blackwood was waiting for me by the door. He held out my umbrella. "It is done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. The Bentley was waiting at the curb. I got in. I didn't look back at the plaza. I didn't look back at the life I had just dismantled. I took my phone out of my pocket. I dialed a number I had saved for this specific moment. "St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital." A voice answered. "This is Thomas Garrison," I said. "I would like to make a donation." "How much, Mr. Garrison?" $20 million, I said. "The entire estate. Everything in the trust. Liquidate it all." There was a silence on the line. "Are you sure, sir? I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "I have no heirs. I have no family. I just want to do some good before I die." I hung up the phone. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The car moved forward, gliding through the rain. I was alone. I was broke, technically, but I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The audit was complete. The books were balanced, and Garrison was finally free. The ballroom descended into absolute bedlam. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of justice. The FBI agents did not handle my son with the white gloves usually reserved for the Plaza Hotel clientele. They spun him around, slamming his face onto the table where the wedding cake stood. Frosting smeared across his cheek as they wrenched his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut cut through the screams of the guests. Bradley was shouting about his rights, about his lawyer, about how this was all a mistake, but his voice was thin and high, the sound of a child realizing the monsters under the bed are real. At the edge of the stage, Vanessa tried to make her escape, hiking up her diamond-encrusted gown to run. She didn't get 3 steps. Vinnie Moretti's men moved with the synchronized precision of a pack of wolves cutting off a straggler. They didn't touch her. They simply stepped in front of her, forming a wall of dark polyester and menace. The largest one, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, looked down at her. He didn't shout. He spoke in a low rumble that was infinitely more terrifying than a scream. "Your husband took our money, Mrs. Garrison," he said. "Since you are legally married as of 2 hours ago, that debt is now a marital asset. We will take the ring as a down payment." Vanessa shrieked as if she had been burned. She looked around for help for her parents, for anyone. But Richard and Linda were busy trying to blend into the crowd of fleeing guests. They had abandoned their daughter the moment the ship started to sink. Hotel security intercepted them near the kitchen doors, blocking their path. They were accessories to fraud, and nobody was leaving until the federal agents said so. Bradley struggled against the agents, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked for a lifeline. He looked for a savior. His gaze landed on me. I was still standing on the stage steps, watching the demolition of his life, with the impassive gaze of an auditor reviewing a bankruptcy filing. "Dad," he screamed, his voice raw with terror. "Dad, do something. You know people. You know the director. Call them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I am good for it." He was begging. He was pleading with the man he had tried to institutionalize. He was asking for salvation from the father he had sold for parts. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I watched as an agent read him his Miranda rights, the words flowing over him like oil. "Please, Dad." Bradley sobbed, snot running down his face, mixing with the tears and the cake frosting. "I am your son. You cannot let them take me. I am scared. I am so scared." His fear was genuine. For the first time in his life, he was facing a consequence he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. He was facing the cold, hard machinery of the federal justice system. I looked at him. I looked at the ruin of the wedding. I looked at the weeping bride being escorted away by the mob enforcers to discuss a repayment plan. I walked down the steps until I was standing right in front of him. The agents paused, giving me a moment. They knew who I was. They knew I had handed them this case on a silver platter. Bradley looked at me with hope. He thought even now that I would save him. He thought that parental love was an infinite resource, a well that could never run dry. "You are right, Bradley," I said softly. "I do know people. I know the judges who will sign your sentencing order. I know the warden who runs the facility where you are going." I leaned in close so only he could hear the final verdict. "And I am going to ask them to make sure you serve every single day of your sentence." His face crumbled. The light went out of his eyes. He realized then that there was no safety net. There was no bailout. He was falling and he was going to hit the bottom. "Get him out of my sight," I said to the agents. They hauled him away, his feet dragging on the marble floor, his screams echoing off the vaulted ceiling, until the heavy doors swallowed him whole. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of Vanessa weeping in the corner as she tried to pull the ring off her swollen finger. The family was gone. The dynasty was dust. And I was the only one left standing in the wreckage. The ballroom had emptied out, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the noise of the party. The guests had scattered like leaves in a storm, terrified of being associated with the disaster. The air still smelled of expensive perfume and fear. The FBI agents were wrapping up gathering evidence, securing the scene. Bradley sat on a chair near the service entrance, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head hanging low. He looked small. The arrogance that had inflated him just an hour ago had punctured, leaving behind a deflated, pathetic shell of a man. I walked toward him. My footsteps echoed on the parquet floor, a slow, deliberate cadence. He heard me coming. He lifted his head. His eyes were red, swollen, filled with a desperate, childish hope. He saw his father approaching, and in his deluded mind, he thought the rescue was finally here. He thought that the lecture was over, the punishment was finished, and now I would make the call that made it all go away. "Dad." He croaked, his voice raw. "I am sorry. I really am. I learned my lesson. Just tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can hire the best lawyers. We can fight this." I stopped in front of him. I looked down at the son I had raised. I looked for the boy who used to catch fireflies in the backyard. I looked for the teenager who had promised to make me proud at his graduation. I couldn't find them. They were gone, consumed by the parasite of greed that sat before me. "I didn't hire a lawyer for you, Bradley," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I hired a prosecutor." His face fell. The hope died, replaced by a cold terror. "But..." "Why," he whispered. "Why are you doing this to me? I am your flesh and blood." I looked at his hands twisted behind his back in steel bracelets. I thought about the signature on the deed. I thought about the hairbrush in the bathroom. "You are right," I said. "You are my flesh and blood. And that is my failure. I spent 30 years auditing companies, finding the rot in the system. But I never audited my own home. I never looked closely at what was growing under my own roof." I leaned in close enough to smell the stale champagne and the sweat of his fear. "I taught you how to read a balance sheet, Bradley. I taught you how to leverage assets. I taught you how to spot an opportunity. I taught you the mechanics of wealth." I paused, feeling a pang of genuine sorrow in my chest. It was the last bit of grief I had left to give. But I forgot to teach you the most important thing. I forgot to teach you how to be a human being. I forgot to teach you that integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue. I forgot to teach you that a man who sells his family has no net worth, no matter what is in his bank account. Bradley sobbed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Dad, please, I can't go to prison. I won't survive." "You will survive," I told him. "You will wake up every day in a cell, and you will have a lot of time to think. You will think about the house you sold. You will think about the mother you dishonored. And you will think about this moment." I straightened up. I adjusted my jacket. "This is the last lesson I will ever teach you, son. And it is the most expensive one." "What lesson?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. "The bill has come due," I said. "And you have to pay it yourself." I turned my back on him. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, don't walk away. Dad." I kept walking. I walked past the agents. I walked past the overturned chairs and the spilled wine. I walked toward the exit where the light of the street lamps was cutting through the rain. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back at the ruin of my family. I walked out of the ballroom and into the night, leaving my son alone in the dark. The rain had finally stopped. The city air, usually thick with exhaust and noise, felt strangely clean as I stepped out onto Fifth Avenue. Blackwood was leaning against the hood of the Bentley, smoking a cigar. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't say a word as he opened the rear door. He knew there was nothing left to say. The job was done. The file was closed. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights of the police cruisers and the wreckage of the wedding in the rearview mirror, I reached for the phone one last time. It wasn't the burner phone. It was my personal line. I dialed the number for the Children's Aid Society. "This is Thomas Garrison," I said when the director answered. "I am dissolving the Catherine Garrison Trust effective immediately." "Yes." "All of it. $20 million. I want it transferred to your general operating fund by morning." There was a gasp on the other end of the line, followed by a stammering silence. "Mr. Garrison, this is extremely generous, but are you sure? Do you want to name a building? Do you want a memorial plaque?" "No plaques," I said, cutting him off. "No names. Just use it to help children who have no one. Use it to give someone a chance I couldn't give my own son. Use it to teach them that character matters more than capital." I hung up the phone. I took the SIM card out of the device and snapped it in half, dropping the pieces into the ashtray. We arrived at Teterboro Airport 30 minutes later. The private jet was waiting on the tarmac, its engines whining a high-pitched song of escape. I didn't have luggage. I didn't have mementos. I had the clothes on my back and a passport in my pocket. I had left everything else behind. The furniture, the photos, the memories. They were all tainted now. Blackwood shook my hand at the bottom of the stairs. His grip was firm like the handshake of a man who had just helped bury a body. "Italy is nice this time of year," he said. "The wine is better than the swill Bradley was serving." "Come visit," I said. "But don't bring any work, and don't bring any news. If the world burns down, I don't want to know about it." I climbed the stairs and settled into the leather seat. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the night sky, I looked down at the sprawling grid of New York one last time. Somewhere down there in a cold holding cell, Bradley was realizing that the game was over. He was realizing that greed is a heavy chain, and he had locked himself in. I turned away from the window. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was looking forward, to a small villa in Tuscany, to mornings without dread, to a life where the only person I had to audit was myself. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in months, I slept without dreaming of betrayal. The nightmare was over. The father was gone, and Garrison was finally truly awake. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that greed is an acid that dissolves even the strongest bonds. I spent my life auditing strangers, finding the rot in corporate ledgers, but my biggest failure was not auditing my own home until it was too late. I thought providing for my son was enough, but I was wrong. You cannot inherit character, you have to build it. If you raise your children to value the price of things over the value of people, do not be surprised when they sell you for a discount. Real wealth isn't what you leave behind in a bank account. It is the integrity you carry within you. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below. Would you have forgiven your son? Or would you have let him face the consequences like I did?